Stop this wedding now! I have an arrest warrant for Mrs. Naomi Carter!
Officer, what did I do?
Young man, this wedding is still in session. Can't this issue wait till after the wedding? The pastor immediately asked as the congregation and the couple stared at the mean ICE agent. This ICE agent was actually storming a black woman's wedding in Oklahoma to arrest her on her wedding day. No, sir, I'm an ICE agent, and I'm here to arrest Miss Naomi Carter, the ICE agent immediately. Little did he know that he would regret this. Little did he know that this would be his last job as an ICE agent. Watch and learn. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, do it now. We post premium quality stories every day just for you on this channel. The summer air in Savannah hung thick and sweet, carrying the scent of magnolia and honeysuckle through the garden where white chairs sat arranged in perfect rows. Afternoon sunlight filtered through ancient oak trees, their Spanish moss swaying gently in the breeze. Laughter rippled through the small gathering of guests. Maybe 40 people, all dressed in their Sunday best, fanning themselves with the ceremony programs that bore two names in elegant script: Naomi and Eli. At the altar, beneath an arch woven with white roses and ivy, Eli Carter stood waiting. His hands were steady at his sides, though his heart hammered against his ribs. He was a tall man, lean and quiet, the kind of person who seemed to take up less space than he actually occupied. His dark suit fit him perfectly, and his eyes never left the white runner that stretched down the aisle, waiting for the woman who had changed everything about his carefully ordered life. The string quartet began playing, and the guests rose to their feet. Naomi appeared at the far end of the aisle, and Eli forgot to breathe. She wore a simple ivory gown that caught the light with every step, her natural hair crowned with small white flowers. Her smile was radiant but nervous, the kind of smile that said she couldn't quite believe this moment was real. Her mother walked beside her, tears already streaming down her face, one hand gripping her daughter's arm like she might disappear if she let go. Eli's throat tightened. 4 years. 4 years since he'd walked into that community health fair and seen her explaining vaccination schedules to a worried mother with more patience than he'd thought possible. 4 years since she'd looked up, caught him staring, and asked if he needed a flu shot with a smile that made him forget why he'd come. 4 years of quiet dinners and long conversations, of learning that love didn't have to be loud to be everything. Naomi reached the altar, and her mother kissed her cheek before taking her seat. The efficient, Reverend Morris, an elderly man who'd baptized half the children in their neighborhood, opened his worn Bible. His voice was warm and steady as he began. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The screech of tires shattered the moment like glass. 3 black SUVs exploded into view, tearing across the grass and skidding to a stop just beyond the last row of chairs. Guests gasped and turned, programs falling from hands. Car doors flew open and men poured out. 6 of them, dressed in tactical gear with badges glinting on their chests and weapons holstered at their hips. Nobody move. The command came from the lead agent, a white man in his early 40s with a military haircut and a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer. His voice carried the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. "This is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We are conducting a federal operation." The wedding guests froze. Someone's phone clattered to the ground. A child started crying. Eli's hand found Naomi's, gripping it tight. Her fingers were ice cold. The lead agent, his nameplate read Harlan, strode down the aisle like he owned it, his team fanning out on either side. His eyes swept over the crowd with open contempt before landing on Naomi. "Naomi Carter." She nodded, unable to speak. "You're being detained for immigration violations." He pulled handcuffs from his belt. "There must be some mistake." Naomi's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I'm a citizen. I have." "Save it." Harlan grabbed her arm roughly, spinning her around. The flowers fell from her hair as he yanked her wrists behind her back. Metal clicked against metal as the cuffs locked into place. "Stop." Naomi's mother lurched to her feet. "You can't do this. She has papers. She's done everything right." "Ma'am, sit down or you'll be detained for obstruction." Harlan didn't even look at her. Eli stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm.
We have all her documentation, her naturalization certificate, her passport. Everything is in order. You can see it right now." Harlan turned to face him, and something ugly flickered across his features. "You Eli Carter, the groom?" He said the word like it tasted bad. "Let me guess. You two met real recently. Quick engagement. Ring a bell? We've been together for 4 years. Sure you have." Harlan's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "You know how many fake marriages we see? People think they can game the system, have a nice ceremony, and we won't notice." He jerked Naomi forward. "Well, we notice. Show me the warrant." Eli's hands were shaking now, but he kept them at his sides. "You need a warrant to detain someone. I have probable cause, which is all I need. Now step back before I add obstruction to your wedding day memories." Phones were coming out now, guests recording with trembling hands. Naomi's cousin was sobbing. The Reverend stood frozen, his Bible still open to the passage he'd been about to read. Harlan noticed the phones and his jaw tightened. "Put those away. This is a federal operation. Recording may constitute interference." Nobody put them away. One of the other agents, younger and clearly uncomfortable, touched Harlan's shoulder. "Sir, maybe we should. We should do our jobs." Harlan cut him off. He pulled Naomi toward the vehicles, her white gown dragging through the grass. Eli followed, his heart in his throat. "Please, just let me see the documentation. Let me understand what's happening." Harlan stopped and turned, and for a moment Eli thought he might actually explain. Instead, he shoved Eli backward with his free hand. Not hard enough to knock him down, but hard enough to make his intent clear. "You want to understand? Here's what you need to understand. Your wife is being detained pending investigation into her immigration status and the validity of this marriage. She'll be processed at the federal facility. You'll be notified of the hearing date. That's all you get. But she's a citizen. Then she's got nothing to worry about, does she?" Harlan's voice dripped with false sympathy. "Course. If there's any problems with her paperwork, any little discrepancies, she might be looking at deportation proceedings. Criminal charges for fraud too." He leaned in closer, lowering his voice, so only Eli could hear. "And you might want to get yourself a good lawyer, because facilitating illegal immigration is a federal crime. Just some friendly advice." Naomi was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as another agent opened the door of the SUV. She looked back at Eli, and the devastation in her eyes nearly broke him. "I love you," she mouthed. Eli's throat closed. He wanted to scream, to fight, to do something, anything. But he knew that's what Harlan wanted. Any resistance would become justification for more charges, more violence. So he stood there, watching the woman he loved being shoved into the back of a government vehicle in her wedding dress, and felt completely powerless. The guests were in chaos now. Naomi's mother had collapsed into her chair, hyperventilating. Friends clustered around her, someone calling for water. The Reverend was trying to calm people down, his voice shaking. Children were being ushered away by worried parents. Harlan surveyed the scene with satisfaction, then turned back to Eli one last time. "You know what your problem is?" He didn't wait for an answer. "You people think you can do whatever you want. Think the rules don't apply. Well, they do, and I enforce them." The SUVs started pulling away, and Eli watched them go, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. His hands were still shaking. The wedding arch stood empty behind him, the roses already starting to wilt in the heat. One of the remaining guests, a man in his 50s wearing a simple gray suit, stood quietly near the back row. He'd been there the whole time, watching everything with an expression that gave nothing away. While everyone else panicked and wept, Marcus Holloway remained perfectly still, his dark eyes tracking the departing vehicles until they disappeared from sight. Eli turned and found Marcus watching him. Their eyes met across the destroyed ceremony, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a shared history that nobody else at this wedding knew about. Eli pulled his phone from his pocket with trembling hands. His first instinct was to call a lawyer, to start fighting immediately. But instead, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. The one labeled simply with an initial and a last name, M. Holloway. He pressed call and lifted the phone to his ear, never breaking eye contact with the man in the gray suit. Marcus answered on the first ring. "I saw everything. They took her." Eli's voice cracked. "No warrant. He wouldn't show me anything. Just took her. I know." Marcus's voice was calm, that particular kind of calm that comes from having seen this exact scenario play out before. What was the agent's name? Harlan. Douglas Harlan. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Eli could hear the soft click of a keyboard. When Marcus spoke again, there was something new in his voice. Not anger exactly, but a cold satisfaction. Douglas Harlan. Assigned to the Savannah field office for 3 years. 8 formal complaints filed, all dismissed internally. 2 civil rights lawsuits settled quietly. And now he just made his biggest mistake. What do we do? You do nothing. Nothing at all. Don't call other lawyers, don't post on social media, don't make any statements. Can you do that? Eli looked around at the chaos, at Naomi's mother being comforted by friends, at the empty aisle where his wife should have been walking back up as Mrs. Carter. Yes. Good. I'm making some calls. This ends today. The line went dead. Eli stood there in his wedding suit, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been the happiest day of his life, and waited. Because waiting was the only thing he could do. Because Marcus Holloway had told him to wait, and if there was anyone in the world who knew how to fight this particular kind of injustice, it was Marcus. Most of the guests didn't know who Marcus was. They'd assumed he was just another friend, maybe someone from Eli's work. They had no idea he was the reason Eli had stayed so calm when Harlan shoved him. No idea that Eli's careful control hadn't been fear or submission, but strategic patience. Because Eli knew something Agent Douglas Harlan didn't. Sometimes the most powerful response to an abuse of authority isn't resistance. Sometimes it's documentation. Sometimes it's letting them dig their own grave while someone watches with a camera and a direct line to the people who can bury them in it. Marcus Holloway had spent 23 years working in federal oversight, specifically investigating misconduct within immigration enforcement. He'd helped design the very protocols that were supposed to prevent exactly what had just happened. He'd seen hundreds of cases of agents abusing their power, targeting communities, using their badges as weapons. And he'd learned that the system, broken as it was, still had pressure points, still had ways to hold people accountable if you knew where to push. He was retired now, technically, but he'd accepted Eli's wedding invitation anyway because Eli had asked him to, because Eli had known, had feared, really, that something like this might happen. That Naomi's past, the harassment she'd faced years ago during a routine traffic stop, the way her name had been flagged in systems she couldn't see or contest, might come back to haunt them on the one day they'd tried to celebrate their future. Eli had hoped he was being paranoid. Marcus had hoped so too. They'd both been wrong. The Reverend approached Eli carefully, like he might break. "Son, is there anything I can do? Anyone I can call? It's being handled." Eli's voice sounded hollow even to himself. "This is wrong. This is so wrong." The old man's hands were shaking. "I've been performing marriages for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Eli just nodded. Words felt impossible. Naomi's mother, Diane, pushed through the crowd toward him. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara, her Sunday hat askew. "They took my baby. They took my baby in her wedding dress." She grabbed Eli's arm. "You have to do something. You have to get her back." "I will." The words came out fiercer than he'd intended. "I promise you, Diane, I'm getting her back." "How?" "They're the government. They have guns and badges and—" "I know people." Eli looked at her directly. "I know people who can help. Trust me. Please." Something in his tone must have convinced her because she nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. Okay. What do we do now?" "We wait. And we make sure every single person here knows what happened. Make sure it's recorded, documented, shared. Can you help with that? Diane straightened her shoulders, some of her strength returning. Yes, I can do that. She turned to the other guests, rallying them with a mother's fierce protectiveness. Within minutes, they were organizing, collecting video footage, writing down exactly what they'd witnessed, making sure everyone had the correct spelling of Agent Harlan's name. It was something to do, some way to fight back against the helplessness. Eli stepped away from the crowd, walking to the edge of the garden where the ground sloped down toward the river. The sun was starting to sink lower, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. It was still beautiful. That was the worst part. The world had the audacity to still be beautiful, while Naomi sat in the back of a federal vehicle, still wearing her wedding gown, being treated like a criminal for the crime of existing while immigrant. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Don't panic. Wheels are turning. Another buzz. This one from a number he didn't recognize. This is attorney Sarah Chen. Marcus Holloway retained me on your behalf. Do not speak to any federal agents without me present. I'm already working on your wife's immediate release. Eli's knees nearly gave out from sheer relief. Marcus had moved fast. Faster than should have been possible. But Marcus had spent 2 decades building a network of contacts in civil rights law, federal oversight, and immigration justice. He knew which judges were sympathetic, which bureaucrats were willing to bend rules in the name of actual justice, which journalists would run with a story like this. And he'd built those relationships specifically for moments like this. Moments when the system failed spectacularly and publicly, creating an opening for accountability. Agent Harlan didn't know any of this. He was currently driving back to the federal facility, feeling quite pleased with himself. Another fake marriage disrupted, another illegal detained. In his mind, he was doing his job, doing it well. The fact that the suspect had been arrested at her own wedding would make for a good story back at the office. His colleagues would laugh about it, maybe buy him a drink. He didn't know that his dashboard camera had recorded everything. Didn't know that the lack of warrant, the physical contact with Eli, the refusal to examine documentation, the inflammatory comments about fake marriages, all of it was being compiled into a complaint that would hit his superior's desk within the hour. He didn't know that 3 of the wedding guests were federal employees in other agencies. That one was a journalist for the Atlanta Constitution. That another was a civil rights attorney who'd already made 5 phone calls before the SUVs were out of sight. He didn't know that Marcus Holloway, the quiet man in the gray suit who'd watched everything without saying a word, had helped write the very oversight protocols that Harlan had just violated 6 different ways. Agent Harlan had made assumptions. He'd looked at a black groom and an immigrant bride and assumed the worst. He'd assumed they were trying to scam the system, assumed they wouldn't fight back, assumed that his badge made him untouchable. He'd assumed wrong. At the federal detention facility on the outskirts of Savannah, Naomi sat in a holding cell that smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. They'd taken her flowers but let her keep the dress, probably because removing it would have required a female officer and too much paperwork. So she sat on the metal bench in her ivory gown, her wrists sore from the handcuffs, and tried not to fall apart. This couldn't be happening. She'd done everything right. She'd come to this country legally at age 7 with her parents. She'd studied hard, graduated college, become a citizen at 22. She'd paid her taxes, volunteered in her community, never even had a speeding ticket. She'd built a good life, a careful life. And now she was in a cell on her wedding day. The door opened and a female officer stepped in, her expression neutral. "Carter?" "Yes. Someone's making a lot of noise about you upstairs. You know a Marcus Holloway?" Naomi's heart jumped. He's a friend of my husband's." The officer's professional mask slipped slightly. "Yeah, well, he must be some friend because I've got orders to keep you here but treat you with extreme care pending review. Whatever that means." She paused. "You got a lawyer coming?" I don't know anything. They just..." I know. I saw the footage. The officer's voice dropped. Look, I can't say much, but between you and me, Harlan screwed up. Bad. Just sit tight. She left, and Naomi was alone again, but now with a fragile thread of hope. Marcus. Of course Eli would call Marcus. She'd only met him once, months ago at a dinner party. Eli had introduced him as a former colleague, someone who'd helped him understand the systems that people like Naomi had to navigate. They'd talked about oversight, accountability, the ways power could be checked when it was abused. She hadn't realized then that Eli was preparing, building relationships, making sure they had someone they could call if the worst happened. Because Eli understood something that Naomi had tried not to think about, that being right, having proper documentation, following all the rules. None of it guaranteed safety. Not in a system where individual agents could decide, on a whim, that your life was subject to their authority. Back at the wedding venue, the guests were starting to leave, but slowly. Nobody wanted to go, like leaving would be accepting that this had really happened. Eli stood near the entrance, thanking people for coming with a surreal politeness that felt like someone else speaking through his mouth. Marcus appeared at his elbow. Walk with me. They moved away from the crowd, toward the parking lot. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Eli the screen. It was an email chain, already dozens of messages long. I contacted the regional ICE director. She's aware of the situation. Harlan's supervisor has been notified. The Office of Professional Responsibility is opening an investigation. And I've got 3 different news outlets ready to run with this story if Naomi isn't released by tonight. Eli stared at the phone, then at Marcus. How did you? I've been doing this a long time, Eli. And I've been waiting for Harlan to make a mistake this big. Marcus's expression was grim. He's been on my radar for 2 years. Multiple complaints, all dismissed internally. The agency protects its own, even the bad ones. But this, he gestured back toward the ruined wedding ceremony. This is too public. Too many witnesses. Too much documentation. They can't sweep this under the rug. What about Naomi? How long until? Attorney Chen is already at the facility demanding immediate release. Without a warrant, they can't hold her more than a few hours, especially once the paperwork review confirms she's a naturalized citizen. Which it will. And Harlan. Marcus's smile was cold. Harlan's career is over. He just doesn't know it yet. At the federal facility, Agent Harlan was discovering that something had gone wrong. Very wrong. He'd barely finished the booking paperwork when his supervisor called him into the office. Not his supervisor's office, but a conference room with 3 people he didn't recognize and one he definitely did. The regional director, Sandra Martinez. Agent Harlan, sit down. Martinez's voice could have frozen fire. He sat, his confidence starting to crack. Ma'am, I'm in the middle of processing a detainee. The detainee you arrested without a warrant at her own wedding. The room went very quiet. I had probable cause. Based on what, exactly? Martinez slid a file across the table. Because according to this, Naomi Carter has been a naturalized U.S. citizen for 8 years. Her documentation is flawless. She's never overstayed a visa, never violated any immigration law, never given anyone any reason to question her status. So please, Agent Harlan, explain to me what probable cause you had to handcuff a citizen at her wedding and detain her. Harlan's mouth opened and closed. There was intelligence suggesting. Show me the intelligence report. It was verbal intelligence from. From whom? Give me a name, a date, a specific credible source. He couldn't. Because there wasn't one. He'd seen Naomi's name flagged in the system years ago. A routine check during a traffic stop that had gone nowhere. And he'd remembered it. When he'd heard about the wedding through department gossip, he'd made assumptions. Had decided this was a marriage fraud case waiting to be exposed. I used my judgment based on experience. Your judgment. Martinez's voice was scalpel sharp. Let me tell you what else I'm seeing in your file, Agent Harlan. 8 complaints in 3 years. 2 civil rights lawsuits that cost the department 6 figures to settle. multiple reports of excessive force, racial profiling, and unauthorized detentions. And now this. She pulled out a tablet and turned it toward him. It showed wedding footage, crystal clear, from multiple angles. Every word he'd said, every rough gesture, the push, the mockery, all of it documented. This video has been seen by the Office of Professional Responsibility, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and about 15,000 people on social media. By tomorrow, it'll be millions. You've made the agency a national embarrassment, Agent Harlan. Again. Ma'am, I was just. You're suspended. Effective immediately. Badge and weapon. Now. The other agents in the room moved forward, and Harlan realized with dawning horror that this wasn't just a reprimand. This was the end. You can't. I have rights. You have the right to an attorney. I suggest you call one. You're going to need it. Martinez stood. We're recommending termination and referring this matter to DOJ for civil rights violations. Get out of my building. In the holding cell, the same female officer appeared at Naomi's door. This time she was smiling. You're free to go. All charges dropped. Someone will bring your personal effects. Naomi stood on shaking legs. That's it? That's it. Your attorney is waiting in processing. And ma'am, the officer's voice softened. I'm sorry. For what it's worth. What happened today was wrong. Naomi walked out of that cell, still wearing her wedding dress, still feeling like she was moving through a nightmare, but now with the faint light of vindication starting to break through the horror. Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in a power suit, met her with a warm handshake and a business card. Your husband will be here in 10 minutes. Let's get you out of this place. Eli broke every speed limit getting to the facility. When he saw Naomi walking out through those doors, her dress dirty and wrinkled, her eyes red from crying, he nearly collapsed with relief. He ran to her and she fell into his arms, both of them holding each other so tightly it hurt. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. I should have. You did everything right. She pulled back to look at him. Marcus called you, didn't he? I called Marcus. Before anything else. Just like we planned. Because they had planned. Not for this exactly, but for the possibility. After Naomi's experience with the traffic stop years ago, after they'd seen too many stories of legal immigrants being detained and deported despite having proper documentation, they'd decided to be prepared. Eli had reached out to Marcus, established a relationship, made sure they had someone they could call who understood the system's weaknesses and knew how to exploit them. They'd hoped they'd never need it. But they'd been smart enough to prepare anyway. Sarah Chen drove them back to Eli's apartment, talking the whole way about next steps. Civil lawsuit against Harlan personally. Complaint with the ICE Office of Civil Rights. Pressure on the agency to reform training and oversight. You two have options, she said as they pulled up to the building. And you have documentation. Plus, I've got Marcus coordinating with civil rights groups who've been tracking Harlan for years. This isn't just about what happened to you. It's about a pattern of abuse. You could be the case that finally stops him. Naomi and Eli looked at each other. Neither of them wanted to be activists, wanted to be in the spotlight, wanted to relive today over and over in depositions and interviews. But they also couldn't let Harlan do this to someone else. We'll do it, Naomi said. Whatever it takes. The story broke nationally within 24 hours. Video of the wedding arrest played on every news channel, accompanied by expert commentary about immigration enforcement overreach, racial profiling, and civil rights. Agent Douglas Harlan's face became synonymous with institutional abuse of power. Within a week, he was officially terminated. The agency released a carefully worded statement about not tolerating misconduct and being committed to professional standards. It meant nothing and everything. Nothing because it wouldn't prevent other agents from making similar choices. Everything because it was at least an acknowledgement that this particular abuse had consequences. The Department of Justice opened a civil rights investigation. Multiple previous cases involving Harlan were reopened. People who'd been too afraid to complain before came forward, their voices adding to a chorus of testimony about years of harassment. Eli and Naomi didn't celebrate. They were exhausted, traumatized, going through the motions of daily life while processing what had happened. But 3 weeks after the wedding, Marcus called them with news. The regional office is implementing new protocols. Mandatory body cameras, stricter warrant requirements, independent review of all wedding-related detentions. It's not everything we wanted, but it's more than we had. Because of us? Naomi asked. Because of you. Because you documented everything. Because you didn't back down. Because you were willing to fight. You made them care about accountability. After the call, Eli and Naomi sat in their living room, the apartment they'd planned to come back to as husband and wife after a honeymoon they'd had to cancel. The wedding gifts people had sent were still stacked in a corner, unopened. We're still not married, Naomi said softly. Legally, I mean. The ceremony never finished. Eli took her hand. Do you want to try again? She thought about it, about walking down another aisle, risking another interruption, reliving that trauma. Then she thought about Harlan, sitting at home without a badge, facing legal consequences for his choices. About the protocols that might prevent another bride from being handcuffed in her wedding dress. Yes, she said. But small. Just us, and the Reverend and Marcus. And we don't tell anyone when or where until after. They got married 4 weeks later in Reverend Morris's study, a quiet ceremony with 3 witnesses. Diane cried happy tears this time. Marcus served as best man and gave a toast about resilience and justice. Naomi wore a simple sundress instead of the wedding gown, which she donated to a charity auction raising money for immigrant legal defense funds. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, they kissed like they were sealing a promise, not just to each other, but to everyone else who'd had their joy stolen by people who saw authority as permission to harm. The legal case against Harlan took 2 years to work through the system. The civil lawsuit resulted in a settlement, not as much as they'd hoped for, but enough to pay off their student loans and establish a fund for legal assistance for detained immigrants. The criminal investigation led to charges of civil rights violations, deprivation of rights under color of law, and falsification of federal documents. Harlan pled guilty to avoid trial and received 3 years probation, community service, and a permanent bar from federal law enforcement. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, but it was something. Eli and Naomi used their settlement money to start a non-profit focused on documenting immigration enforcement abuses. They partnered with civil rights organizations, trained community members on their rights, and maintained a database of complaints against individual agents. Marcus joined their board, bringing his expertise and contacts. They called it the Wedding Witness Project, because they wanted people to remember that this could happen to anyone, anywhere, even on days that were supposed to be sacred. 5 years after the wedding, they had their first child, a daughter they named Hope, because despite everything, they still believed in the possibility of a more just world. They told her the story of her parents' wedding day when she was old enough to understand, not to frighten her, but to teach her about standing up to injustice, about the power of documentation, about the importance of having people you can call when the system fails. Agent Douglas Harlan disappeared from public life. He moved to another state, worked a series of security jobs, kept his head down. Sometimes he saw the wedding video resurface online, became a meme, a shorthand for abuse of authority. He told himself he'd been doing his job, following his training, that the system had scapegoated him for political reasons. He was wrong, but he never quite figured that out. Marcus Holloway retired fully after helping establish the Wedding Witness Project, satisfied that his decades of work had led to something concrete, something lasting. He attended Hope's baptism and her first birthday party, always quiet, always watching, the kind of presence that made people feel safer just knowing he was there. The Savannah Icefield office slowly changed its culture, aided by new leadership and constant oversight. Not every agent agreed with the reforms, but enough did that the worst abuses became rarer. The body camera footage became a powerful tool for accountability, though it took years of advocacy to make the cameras mandatory and the footage accessible. None of it brought back the wedding day that Eli and Naomi lost. Nothing could. But sometimes justice isn't about restoration. It's about making sure the harm doesn't spread, that the person who wielded power carelessly loses the right to wield it at all, that the system bends slightly toward accountability even when it wants to protect its own. 10 years after the wedding, a journalism student doing research on immigration enforcement found the original video footage in a digital archive. She wrote her thesis about it, about how one moment of documented abuse had rippled outward, changing policy and ending a career and inspiring a movement. She interviewed Eli and Naomi for the project, now a middle-aged couple with 3 children and a non-profit that had helped hundreds of families. "Do you regret fighting back?" the student asked. "Was it worth all the trauma, all the years of legal battles?" Eli and Naomi looked at each other, that married couple telepathy flowing between them. Then Naomi answered, "Every time someone uses our database to file a complaint against an abusive agent, it's worth it. Every time a wedding happens without ICE showing up, it's worth it. Every time someone watches that video and realizes they have the right to demand accountability, it's worth it." She paused. "But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't hard. If I said there weren't days I wished we'd just let it go, moved on, healed quietly." "Justice is exhausting, but necessary," Eli added. "Because if we'd stayed quiet, Harlan would still be out there, still terrorizing people, still believing his badge made him untouchable." The student published her thesis, and it won awards, and the video circulated again with new context. Somewhere in Atlanta, Douglas Harlan saw it trending and felt that familiar twist of anger and shame. He still believed he'd been treated unfairly, that he'd been doing his job, that political correctness had destroyed his career. He was still wrong. Back in Savannah, in a house filled with the comfortable chaos of family life, Eli and Naomi sat on their porch watching their kids play in the yard. Hope was teaching her younger siblings a game, her voice carrying on the evening air. The magnolias were blooming again, that same sweet scent that had perfumed their almost wedding 10 years ago. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Naomi said. "That moment when Harlan told you to make your phone call, like he was doing you a favor. Like he thought you had no one to call who could help." Eli smiled. "Biggest mistake of his career. Do you think he understands that? Even now, probably not. People like him don't usually understand where they went wrong. They just know they got caught." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from years of partnership and shared struggle. Their wedding hadn't gone the way they planned, but their marriage had been forged in something stronger than romance, in resistance, in resilience, in the quiet power of refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. If you found this story powerful, if it made you think about accountability and justice, please subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling us your thoughts. These stories matter, and they reach more people when you engage with them. Hit that like button and share it far and wide. Because the only way we change systems is by refusing to let abuses of power go unnoticed and undocumented. The sun set over Savannah, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, just like it had on that terrible, beautiful day a decade ago. But now there were children playing in the yard, a non-profit helping families navigate an unjust system, new protocols protecting people from agents like Harlan. The world hadn't become perfect, but it had bent, slightly, towards something better. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. Not perfection, but progress. Not the absence of injustice, but the presence of accountability. Not a world where harm never happens, but a world where when it does, there are consequences. That phone call Eli made changed everything. One call to the right person, at the right moment, with the right documentation. It ended a career built on abuse. It started a movement focused on protection. It proved that power Even federal authority has limits when people are brave enough to test them. Agent Douglas Harlan thought he was untouchable that day. He thought a badge and a gun and institutional backing made him immune to consequences. He was wrong, and that wrongness cost him everything he'd built his identity on. Meanwhile, Eli and Naomi Carter built something better. A family, a mission, a legacy of resistance. Their wedding day was stolen, but their marriage became a testament to the power of fighting back with strategy, documentation, and the courage to demand accountability. That's the story. Not a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but a true story about real people who refuse to accept injustice quietly. About a phone call that changed everything. About a system that bent, reluctantly, toward accountability because people like Marcus Holloway had spent decades preparing for moments like this. If this resonated with you, don't just watch and move on. Engage with it, share it. Make sure these stories keep reaching people who need to know that resistance is possible. Subscribe, comment, like, and share. Your engagement isn't just a number. It's how we build communities of people who believe in accountability and justice. Because the next time an Agent Harlan walks into someone's most precious moment, believing he's untouchable, there should be a Marcus Holloway waiting in the back row. There should be phones recording. There should be people ready to fight back. And there should be the knowledge that one phone call made to the right person can end a career built on cruelty. That's the power we all have. The power to document, to resist, to demand better. The power to make that one phone call that changes everything. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to our channel, and tell us exactly where you are watching from.